Hello. So this is part 2 of what is a corpus. Now, in the old days, before we had corpuses, dictionaries were made by experts. And usually the experts were university professors or teachers or people with a language background. And for every word in the dictionary, these experts had to think up an example sentence to illustrate how the word was used. Now, in English-speaking countries, almost all English dictionaries nowadays are made by corpuses. But in Japan, Japanese English dictionaries are still often made in the old way by university professors thinking up examples. And if we look at these examples here, these are real examples from the Genius Japanese English Dictionary. You can see something of the background of the people who made these sentences. So you've got the first one is, he was invited to the Masters, I guess that means golf tournament. And the second one, take an entry test for the Yankees. So there's baseball. And then in the third and fourth one are about buying houses, owning houses, having daughters, getting married. So all of these, when you look at these examples, they're the kind of things that middle-aged university professors in Japan think of when they think of these words. These are their experience. Now, if I was going to think of an example for the word invited, I think maybe he was invited to a party. Or recently, we often use invite someone to a Zoom meeting. And if I was thinking of an entry test, the most common example in Japan surely is an entry test to the university. So these examples come from the experience of individual people. They're not necessarily they're not necessarily representative of the overall use of language. And if these dictionaries had used a corpus, I'm sure they would have come up with different examples. Now, I say I'm sure, that means I can't say for certain because I haven't looked at the corpus to find out. But if we do look at the corpus, I'm fairly sure we'll find that it doesn't give these examples very much. Now, in this field of dictionaries, lexicography, grammar, and so on, there are two ways we can look at language. We can take the prescriptive approach and say that a dictionary or a grammar book tells you what you should do. That is, it's written by experts. They know what we should do. And we look at the dictionary to find out what the experts say. Now, what happens with a corpus is the corpus tells you many examples of how a particular word or phrase is actually used by real people. So all of the examples you find in a corpus are real sentences said or written by real people. This is what's called a descriptive approach. In other words, instead of telling us what people should do, it just tells us what do people actually say or write. So if we go back to our original questions, who and whom, or bored of or bored with, which is correct, or access, can it be a verb? These examples, we can look at the corpus to find out not what do the experts say, but what actually do people do when they use these words. And this is what the corpus tells us, for example, about the word whom. First, it's in long-term decline. And that's been visible since the 1960s. In other words, it was quite common in the 1960s, but gradually it's becoming less common. However, whom is still normal after a preposition. And who isn't? That means we can say, for example, 25 students, 12 of whom were women. But nobody says 12 of who. Whom is common in simple relative clauses. But who is now equally common, and it's becoming more so. So the woman whom I met yesterday, that's one of the continuing uses of whom. But still, many people just say the woman who I met yesterday. And finally, whom is very, very rare at the beginning of a sentence. Whom did she face is very unusual. It's who did she face? What about bored of and bored with? Well, in 1992, just 30 years ago, bored with was 25 times more frequent than bored of. But by now, at least by 2018, bored with was only 1.5 times more frequent. In other words, bored of, some people will tell you that's wrong, but in fact, it's becoming less and less wrong as time goes by, and particularly among younger people, where bored of is gradually replacing bored with. And finally, can access be a verb? Well, the simple answer is yes, it can. There's a long history in English of nouns coming to be used as verbs. For example, the word contact was originally a noun, but we have the use contact as a verb. I'll contact you tomorrow. Please contact me if you have a problem. We have the use of contact like that beginning in 1626. So people who tell you contact isn't a verb are just wrong. That's how it's used today. Oh, sorry. And so the important question here is, don't ask about anything in language, is it correct? Ask, is it normal? Can you communicate with this? Now, we're going to go into a little bit of theory here. You could call it a new theory of language in a way. It's not so new now, but it's maybe has a shortish history. In the traditional view of language, people said, well, language is made up of words on the one hand and grammar. And grammar means how we put those words together. And traditionally, people thought, well, grammar is the basis of the language. And once you know the grammar, you just slot the words in to the various places.